Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Journey to Happy podcast. I'm Olga, your host, and today I'm with a special guest. Her name is Nicole Trick Steinbach.
Steinbach.
Okay, let's
so
try that
hard
again.
to say. It's so hard to say. It's Steinbach.
Yes, I'm glad you said it. It's German, I'm going to guess.
Yes, very.
And so I apologize for not pronouncing it properly. German will be probably the further language from Spanish, which is how my brain operates. Nicole, I'm so happy that you're here in this podcast and to do this episode, which ladies, stay tuned. We're going to talk about women in technology. And here's the reason I've invited Nicole. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard my clients and women in general describe themselves as non-techie, and then just have all the reasons to not partake or do things that would otherwise be really helpful to them and make life a lot easier because they've got this belief that they're not techie. So let me introduce you to Nicole, and then I'm going to let her take the lead on how we're going to have this conversation. But ideally, I want all of you listening, in case you also relate to this limiting belief that you're not a techie woman or a woman who can do anything with technology, to take a listen and to maybe reevaluate if that perception of yourself is helpful and what is the world missing and your world missing by you holding this belief. And hopefully Nicole will help us get out of there. And self-disclosure, I've used this description of myself. I'm like, oh, I'm not techie, so I would only use programs that are actually dumb proof. Like if I can do it, anybody else can do it. That's my standard of like when something is difficult or simple enough. Hence, everything in my life is Apple. I've learned how to use this thing. Do not change the game on me. All right.
Oh my God, you're making me laugh so hard. It also, just spoiler alert, it took me over a decade to embrace the title woman in tech. So same. Yeah.
There you go. There's hope, ladies. There is hope for us. So Nicole is an international bravery coach for women in technology. She's a former tech executive. She has worked in over 25 countries, and it is at home in both the US and in Germany. So you live between the two countries? Like you go between Germany and the States?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I lived in Germany for 13 years, graduated from college and moved to Germany. Planned to stay for 9 months, stayed for 13 years. Came back to the States about 6 years ago, I think now, 6.5 years maybe. And I sound American. I was educated here. English is my native language. And I think like a German adult.
Interesting. And you're raised, you have children, Nicole?
I have 2 little ones. Yes. I have an 11-year-old who's in middle school. And then I have a 9-year-old who's in elementary school. Yeah.
Did you feel when you're raising them the German way or the American way? Or is there a nice marriage in between the two cultural backgrounds?
That is so fascinating. I was just talking to, I think my therapist about this in the last like 6 months or so, because I grew up really, really poor in the United States. So my mom was a single mom. She was just turned 20 when she had me. So my experience of raising kids in the US is based primarily on lack and struggle, things being hard. And I married into a German family that's well off. They've lived in the same area for a very long time. My husband's mom has. And so there's a lot of like mutual support and leaving space and taking care of things. And so I tend more towards how my husband was raised than I do how I was raised, just because we don't have much scarcity, right? We have more than enough. We have a beautiful home. We go in between our 2 countries, and I still have a lot more like, did you get your homework done and not following up from my childhood, right? If you're hungry, get some food. You have to make your request. So it's not enough for my kids to say, I'm hungry, right? They need to like make a request. So there's still that individualism of the US,
Mhm.
but a lot more of the collectivism from Germany.
And Europe in general.
Yeah. So I think I'm still figuring that out. And when my kids are grown, I'll have a really good answer.
Okay. I asked because my husband is French Canadian. I live in
Yeah.
Canada, but I'm Colombian. I was born and raised in
Yeah.
Colombia, and so and for me, it would be such a loss. It feels to me so much more. I don't know that I would be this. I'll probably would have been this attached to teaching my son cultural aspects and like making sure that we're like
Yeah.
I'm teaching my family values, my cultural values. But the fact that I'm not home makes it even more prevalent and important for me. Like I want this kid to feel Colombian, to
Yes.
act Colombian, actually to act like both French Canadian and Colombian. Both things are very important to me. So
Yes.
that's I'm always curious, like, oh, cool. And how are you raising your children? Because having
Oh,
experienced both cultures at early ages for you, I'm
yes.
sure you're kind of dancing between the two things. So
Yeah. So now that you've said it that way, I actually do have a really strong answer. So my kids go to German school. When we lived in Germany, we watched things only in English and they only spoke to me in English. Here they go to German school. We celebrate all the German holidays. We have German Christmas and American Christmas. We have the Christkind, who's the spirit of Christmas, who comes on the 24th. We have Santa, who comes on the 25th. We talk about our cultural heritages, both positive and negative. So like we talk about, the German comfort and Herzlichkeit, which is like being of comfort, being wanted, being supported, being held, that kind of stuff. We also talk about the obligation of Nazism and what that means for our family. And then in the United States, we talk about individualism and creation and innovation and flexibility. But we also talk about the obligation we have because of slavery and Jim Crow and the Reconstructionism and Black Lives Matter and things like that. So we really, really consciously, our kids are both.
yes.
And my kids self-identify very differently. So my son actually self-identifies as a German. That is so important to him, but he hates going to German school. And then my daughter self-identifies as American, who's also German, which is really fascinating. But yeah, we are very, very intentional. So St. Martin's Festival is coming up. That's a really important festival in Southern Germany. We really bring the food in. The Germans are very hostile towards an overpacked schedule, whereas Americans seem to be utterly terrified of quiet time. So we really consciously keep it free. Like we keep a lot of space in our calendars. Our kids do one activity a semester. So German, it doesn't count because they have to go every Saturday, but they get to choose one. And this semester, my kids decided to have none. They wanted the freedom of the schedule. They felt like they were being too busy. So yeah. So I love that you were more specific because I'm like, oh wait, I have a very specific answer to that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Like it's a very thought out, and I wonder if this is if so much thought goes into families who are not biracial or multicultural, like I think that there's so much discussion goes on between my husband and I about what matters to pass on to him. And I definitely am the leading force because my husband is French Canadian, but French Canadians have been living in an English culture for a long time, and they're very strong to their French culture. They will not give up on speaking French. But I feel that my husband has like grown up with both cultures so strongly that to him it's like, oh, it's fine if he's or if he's not. And I'm like, no, you have to be so, like I want to make sure the foods are being made and like whatever is important to you is important to, or like in your culture, it's important to us to pass on.
Right.
Whereas if I had grown up in Colombia with a Colombian husband, I don't think we would have had all these discussions and that much thinking. Anyways, here's my brain taking me completely off.
I love this conversation, but this is like, so I talk a lot about bravery. I talk about bravery because bravery is really hard for me. Mm-hmm. It's hard to have a conversation about what is culturally important figuring that out, having the disagreement, and then staying in action. Like that takes a lot of bravery. Right. And in our relationships, it's really, really important. I mean, I think that your story also tells a little bit about it, right? Because you were a refugee, you had to flee. It was not like I was 19. No, I was 19 the first time I went abroad. I was 22 when I moved to Germany. It was my conscious choice.
Makes a difference.
Right. It makes a huge difference. Yeah, totally.
I was just talking to my coach. So I just had a one-on-one coaching session. I had to clean my tears because look, I had tons of tears before that coaching call, during that coaching call, talking about bravery.
Mm-hmm.
I realized how having had no choice but to move here as a refugee, because I had to, like you said, I was fleeing, made me think that planning was unsafe and useless.
Yeah.
And I wonder how this is going to relate into our conversation of technology. But so I have like this very strong resistance, which I only became aware the last half hour about how much resistance I have with planning, because I so profoundly remember how I arrived to this country and thinking, well, this wasn't my plan. My plan was to be a lawyer and live in my country and raise children in my culture and marry the boyfriend I had and be with my family. And like, that was the plan. And then life happens and the plan changed. And I remember making a conscientious decision, never plan ever again anything, because you're going to have a lot of disappointment if you plan. And so now I'm trying to become friends with planning and making it feel safe. And I think I see here that you have a podcast and it's called Celebrate Brave. Is that the name? Yeah.
Yes.
And so I love that your theme while helping women in technology is bravery. That approach is so powerful because, like I was saying, I wasn't aware of this resistance that I had against safety until I became aware just now. You know what's beautiful? I can't become unaware now. It's there.
Yes.
That's all I needed to become aware of. I understand where it's coming from. And now I can make, like you're raising your children, conscientious decision to have a new thought, a new relationship with planning that serves me and that holds space for why I feel the way I feel about planning.
Yeah. And that is the type of bravery that I talk about, Olga. It's about what's brave for you. So right now on Instagram, I'm doing 100 days of brave and answering the question 100 times, what is brave? And you're probably going to see yourself show up sometimes in the 80s or 90s. Cause it's like, if it feels unsafe to plan for whatever reason, then choosing to plan, however small, however big, however detailed, however general, that's brave. That's the kind of bravery that I'm talking about. Cause those are the shifts that really make a difference. Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
So let's begin at the beginning. This totally took a different start. I
love it.
Plan, which is why, by the way, for all of you listeners, I never script a podcast episode with a guest ever. I always just let it be because then it feels real, because it is real. Which is how I had a conversation between two friends. How I met Nicole was through our coaching group. We're both in the same coaching program. And there's a variety of coaches within that group. And I feel very privileged to be exposed to a variety of humans who are doing incredible work. Nicole, like I said, you stood out to me because of this limiting belief that I keep hearing. And that until I met you, I didn't think of addressing in the podcast or even with my clients. And then I thought, I am siding with this belief every time I don't do anything about it to help people change this perception that, hey, you might be a woman. We might not have, this might not be the area in which many of us choose to specialize on. That might not feel like whatever, like what we all like, oh my God, I cannot wait to be super good at technology. Maybe it's not your thing, but it is a reality that we have to live with and that it makes life a lot easier, in my opinion. And that if we can just grow that comfort with the technology, I think that I'll be doing my part here by just helping people think differently. So I don't know. What do you want to tell us? Like, how did you get into this work? What moves you to do this work? And then we can just dive into the limiting belief and help people get rid of it, if at all possible, within the time we have.
Yeah, totally. So what I would say is, how did a person who was studying humanities in school, who came from a impoverished background, who got her first email when she was a freshman in college, but was also in the very first class in the state of Pennsylvania to take an online college class, how did that person end up as the coach for women in tech? And the answer is the Department of Computer Science paid $2 more an hour. That's how I got into tech. I was a secretary for a couple of professors who were in technology, and I hated it at the beginning. I hated it. And I would complain and complain and complain to my roommate, who kept reminding me that I was poor and I needed to get through college, and computer science paid $2 more an hour. And then there was this moment where I realized, wait a second, we're all working for the same goal. We actually want to improve things, and they're coming at it from a totally different perspective, total different mindset, starting point, set of solutions, but we're all working to make the world a slightly better place. And so every time that I thought of getting away from technology, I got another amazing opportunity in technology. I ended up as a consultant before I even knew there was something called consulting.
I believe it.
It was crazy. And over time, I learned about change management. I did communications. I did board comms, internal comms, like all the things. And I got sent to coaching because I was super aggressive, and not in the way that they tell women that they're aggressive, but they're actually being assertive, like, y'all, I was slamming doors and calling names. Okay. Like, I deserved to be sent to coaching. And it just opened up this entire world. There was a misunderstanding, and a board member asked me to go coach this up and coming leader, when the reality was I was being coached, but there was just misunderstanding. But I stepped into it. The first person I was asked to coach stepped into it. And then I've been coaching ever since, as besides my job. And then stepped into having my own business 3 years ago. The number one thing that I want to say about this idea, well, actually, I'm going to back into it. Okay. So the first thing is, tech is the spine of the world. You tell me one thing you do in your life that is completely independent of tech. Really smart people have spent a lot of time thinking about this, and it's like eating, going to the restroom.
I was going to say making coffee with my French press. I'm like, oh, wait.
There you go. Right. Right. Making coffee. Right. Like the baseline humanity that you can say, okay, 200,000 years ago, humans were doing that as well. Everything else, think about how we build friendships now, how we stay in contact with our friends, how we order things, how we ship things, how we design things. Even painting your house is related to tech. How do they mix the paint? Right? It's all tech. So no matter what your job is, even senior care, if you see senior care in Europe, I know Colombia has some really great programs, United States, Canada, South Africa, et cetera, like all these places, your senior care provider shows up with a mobile device and an app.
And then you feel safe. They know what they're doing.
Right? Right. And they are also supported. Right. So the first thing I would offer to everyone is, regardless of your job, you are perpetually and consistency working with and around tech. The women I support are all the way down the value chain. They're in strategy, business development, product, actual development, right? Sales, marketing, implementation, support. And all of them have the chance, finance, they all have the chance to call themselves a woman in tech, right? So it's just a choice.
And you know what? I just want to offer this thought, because this is what came to me as you were talking. And here's a thought for all of you, based on this information Nicole just provided to us so eloquently. You are already a woman in tech.
Yes.
Like you're already a techie, because these are the words that my clients use. I'm not techie. And then insert something that they're missing out on, or they're explaining why they took longer to come into the meeting or whatever, sorry, it's just techie is not my thing. I'm not techie. Everybody knows I'm not techie. Like they just need to introduce this. It's like, don't expect anything crazy from me, because I am not techie. And what if you were to then notice that if you make coffee in the mornings, that if you have your house paint like that, you're already utilizing technology in your everyday. I love that.
Yes. And this is actually an exercise. So sometimes I have people come to me and they're like, I want to join tech. I want to join tech. And I'll say, that's great. We'd love to have you, right? Like there's so many jobs and we make so much money. Come on over. And I would say, okay, so woman in tech on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you identify with that label? And so with the exercise I give them, if they're anywhere below a 7, is write down all the times you are a woman interacting with technology, right? Within 2 weeks, if they actually do the exercise, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a woman in tech. And by the way, I have 15,000 recommendations for how we can make this better. I'm like, come make the money and work less, right? So this is the second thing that I want to offer to everyone. And this is something that I've shared with a lot of coaches, because you hear this from a lot of coaches, right? Ready? Of course you struggle with tech. Of course. You're not a mediocre white man. So whenever you engage with tech, I want you to put on your mediocre white man suit, lower your expectations, lower your intelligence, and you'll find it's much easier to deal with. Because one thing that's very true about tech, and there's so much research and so many statistics about this, it plays to the lowest common denominator and has a banging marketing budget to convince you otherwise. So zip on that mediocre white man suit, lower your expectations, lower your intelligence, and you'll find it's really easy to engage with Zoom. It's really easy to send a text message. It's really easy to engage with a CRM. And the more people can do these two things, number one, already claim it and collect all the data for how you're already engaging in tech. And then you're going to come up with like literally 15,000 ways it could be better, right? And then also, you're not a mediocre white dude. Of course, it doesn't come natural to you. You're glorious and wonderful and unique. When those two things come together, like literally there's nothing to stop anyone. People who came to me and had no desire to start coding are suddenly curious and they're coding stuff. Like, what?
So I had to code in university.
Mm-hmm.
I hated it from the moment the class was called coding. Like, and understanding now what I know, what made it really difficult, and that I barely passed the class. I passed it because I don't fail at anything. Keep that in mind. I passed it maybe the C-, but I passed it. I now understand what I know now is that the perception I had of coding was that it relates to math, and math is difficult for me and I'm not good at it. And therefore this whole thing sounds like physics to me and I am not going to be good at it. And that was my attitude going in unconsciously, right? Like, this is difficult. This is hard. Why do I have to do it?
Yes.
I'm going to struggle.
Yes. And
what I see happening today in my life, maybe not so much, like I no longer see myself as a techie or not techie. I just use the systems that I know, and I spend some time trying to learn them. And I notice the same resistance kind of just coming up for me, where I'm like, oh, but I don't want to do that, because then I'm going to have to learn something that is difficult. So not knowing what I now know, if I had a different thought about my coding class, I might have enjoyed it. I might have found it easy. I might be using it today. Right. And making life a lot easier for me. Instead, before I started, I was very clear in that this was not going to be easy, not going to work for me, and I was never going to do anything related to coding ever again.
And I love that. I would just offer the following. If you had been indoctrinated differently, you would have never had that thought in the first place.
No.
Ever.
If my math teacher would have liked me, I might have never had that thought either. Right.
And if your math teacher had been indoctrinated differently, your relationship would have been different. And if your math teacher had been indoctrinated, right? Like
Right.
we are carrying the indoctrination of generations, centuries behind us. And right now in the personal development space worldwide, this is also true in Germany right now. This is also true in wide swaths of Asia. There's a lot of, well, just choose a different thought. Just choose it. Yes, that's wonderful. And we've all been indoctrinated that taller people are smarter. You know, the first time someone told me, you've been indoctrinated by society that taller people are smarter, they're more capable. It's like, whoa, oh, right? Oh, now I can decide, okay, I was taught that. Do I want to believe it? And now I can choose a different thought, right? Like there is both and. We live within a society and we choose how we live within the society. I was never taught anything about physics. Never. More people from my high school got married than went to college. 2 of us left the state of Ohio, me and another girl. She went to Montana. Nobody taught me that physics was hard or based on math. Nobody told me anything because nobody talked about it. So then I roll into my first physics class and the first message I get is physics is fun. I still have so much fun with physics. I have a blast with physics.
I didn't get that memo.
Right? You got a different memo. You were indoctrinated in a different way. We all are, right? And so it's like the both and this is especially true in technology. When we tell women, just decide that you're a woman in tech, which is something that came out of a massive, one of the biggest diversity and technology organizations just recently sent out this message. And it was like, just decide, just call yourself. And I'm like, yes. And let's acknowledge that most of us had a Barbie that told us math was hard. Like both and.
Well, let's just, if we're going to go down this path, which you're just making me think of it as so interesting. And I think we need to honor that because it's in our DNA. Just like Black people from today still carry fears of slavery.
Yes.
Let's not go that far behind where we had no rights.
Yeah.
And so I think we were like segregated as less intelligent and our brains were not as big. And like so much of that we're still living and carrying, even if we live in the most like equalitarian of societies, we can't delete the past from our DNA that our grandmothers carry, that our great grandmothers carried. Right. Where we may be walking away from like having these concepts of like, whoa, that's math, that's not for me. You know, my mom is a retired lawyer, and she tells me she was one of the few females studying law at the time. And my grandfather was absolutely like keen on all of his daughters having a degree of any kind, even law. Nice. Even law, if you want to do the profession that's been for men for a long time. And when I was in law school, I had a dinosaur teaching a class where he was like, he openly said, like, it's shocking there's so many females in the classroom. To him, like, times have changed. And we're like, wow, we can't train you as well anymore because now you're being educated. Yeah. This, you know, I was in law school 20 years ago. It's not that far. Yes. And so we still carry, I think, and I think this, I'm loving this approach for all of my listeners here to even think that you siding with the thought that says that you're not techie, it's somehow agreeing with hundreds of what the thought about women in like hundreds of years back when we actually were thought as having less capacities and a smaller brain. Yes. Because it kind of relates. As you were talking, I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. Now, as a value, as a principle, I am going to start changing the generations because I want, you know, my grandchildren to not necessarily carry that DNA.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is also true for eating disorders. So if your ancestry comes from, and this is for men and for women, there's a bunch of research for this out of what we call the Southeast Asian areas, because there's a lot of eating disorders in that area. And what they found is that particularly with disordered eating and bulimia, which is where you shove lots and lots of food into your body and then you repel it, there's such a massive correlation. It's way over 70%, right? So statistically, just a huge confirmation that in your ancestry, whether it was 3 generations or 7 generations, had some sort of massive food in a massive food scarcity, right? And it's directly correlated, one could even begin to say caused, right, by DNA changes from in between 3 and 7 decades or 7 generations behind you.
So interesting.
And that is extraordinary, right? Because what do so I'm in recovery for disordered eating. So this is something that I spent a good amount of time with, right? What was the message that I was gifted when I was 17? I didn't love myself. I didn't take care of myself. I was maltreating myself. When in reality, yes. And I come from an immigrant background to the United States. Everybody came because there wasn't enough food in Germany. There wasn't enough food in Ireland. And that's literally my background, right? So of course it's both and we, like, to your point, we get to start to heal that, knowing that we've already given the DNA to our kiddos. We've given the cultural DNA, we've given the physical DNA. And if we've adopted kiddos, they carry the DNA of their background, but we can offer them another just by showing up how we live, right? And when we take that more complex, more holistic perspective, I think that that's when we begin to truly heal ourselves, but also dismantle systems that have been created by other people. And because people created those systems, we can actually create other systems. That's a possibility for us. And of course, that also stands for software, systems and systems.
And safety.
And safety.
I'm going to go with the S's because I think it feels safe for us today to say, I'm not techie. Yeah. So that like you were saying, the expectations get really low as to what can I expect from you. And if you make mistakes, well, she did say she wasn't techie, right? Like for us, it feels like we're protecting ourselves. It feels safe. Yeah. But what if we begin to think that the safe thing to do, or like it is safe for us to, it is now safe. It is now safe to begin to identify ourselves as techie savvies and techie users. And even there to teach technology. Yeah. Or how to use things to others, because we do. Yeah. Like I see my son is just turned 3, and I think he might have been 1 when he grabbed my phone and he just knew what to do. Yes. And I'm like, yes. Especially if you have Apple products, right? So Apple products were actually, so first of all, Apple doesn't do any of their data management. So that's really important, right? They've really specialized on one specific aspect, which is the user interface in the first 2 levels. All the data management is done by an expert group. Apple outsources, just let yourself consider that maybe that's something for you, dear listener, right? But also they had an animal behaviorist in the first design sessions. So they designed that not for humans, but for animals. Interesting. Right? So again, lower the expectations, lower the intelligence, and you might discover it's easier to engage with tech when you put on your mediocre suit. So let's go there, because then our listeners don't know that it is their own, like we naturally want to complicate things. It cannot be easy, right? This is our ongoing thought about life. It cannot be easy. And when it is easy, we make it complicated. Like it's been great so far. So let me just bring some drama into my life. So we do the same with technology. Yep. We have this thought it cannot be easy. Like, and we kind of admire, women in technology must be really bright.
Right.
And I would say that we do the same with women who are engineers. Like I kind of put them up on a pedal. So I'm like, oh no, I'm just a coach. I have no idea. Like your intelligence must be greater and bigger, and your brain must be the size of the brain of a man. No, I'm joking. But that's essentially what we're saying, right? Like, oh, whoa, I couldn't possibly teach about crypto. I couldn't possibly teach about math and physics. So what do we tell this person who's listening to us, who's thinking like, okay, so maybe I do relate to all these concepts that you ladies are talking about. I still feel safe saying I'm not a woman in tech or a techie woman for that purpose. How do they begin to then tell themselves, and I appreciate that you're saying it's more than just a thought, right? Just change the thought is not going to be enough. Change the thought, and what else?
Yeah. So I would go back to the exercise, like write down all of the times you engage with technology and give yourself permission to write down how it could be better. Right? Seriously, I don't usually share that second part with people who are on a consultation with me, right? They just come back naturally and are like, and we could do this 15,000, 25,000 better ways. It's like, yeah, we really could. The second thing that I would say, because I've listened to some of your podcast episodes, is give compassion to the people who create this technology because they believe the same nonsense. Right? Half of the time. So there's this role. So there's something called agile development. And the idea is that instead of waiting until a product is perfect, you send it out to your first users and then more users and things like that when it's usable, knowing that you'll go back and perfect it over time. And inside of that, you collect developers who are doing the actual coding into smaller groups, 8, 10, 12, 16. On top of every single one of those groups is somebody who is also a developer, can code, but has additional skills. And that's called a Scrum Master. One of the hardest parts of being a Scrum Master is reminding your developers to stop making everything so fucking complicated. Because they're just humans too, right? If it's simple, they're going to make it complicated. If it's easy, they're going to make it hard, right? So for your listeners, based on the messages that you've shared in the past, be compassionate to the other people. And what we know from neurobiology and neuroscience is that when we practice compassion to others, we practice compassion to self.
It's born within you to feel it for somebody else. So,
yeah. And this is the other thing that I want to say. People who've been indoctrinated as women, people who've been conditioned and socially engaged as women, we have been taught to judge ourselves, not others. If we judge others, we are the mean girls, right? So it's better and safer and more supported if we're mean to ourselves versus judging others. I want to gift you permission to judge the software, judge the hardware, judge all of it. Should Zoom be in squares? No, it should not. Squares hamper relationship building. That's been clear since the 1940s. Don't do squares. Why are there squares? Right?
Here we are.
Judge it, not me. So as we were coming on here, my microphone would not, y'all, former executive in technology. I coach women in tech. My microphone would not connect to the hardware so that Zoom would pick it up. Then I got on and my computer threw up a security warning. So I had to leave the Zoom and come back in. Did you notice? I have no blame in that situation. The microphone wouldn't connect. Zoom couldn't pick up. Computer through security. I have no drama about this because I'm going to judge the software and not myself. So I give you permission to judge all the software and hardware, all of it.
I love that because I have been that person and then I feel inadequate. Somehow I didn't do it right. I must not know. And then I start that meeting already feeling like 2 meters underground that I have to pick up myself from. Be like, okay, let's just gather our thoughts again and like be present because I just made a whole list of mistakes. And I absolutely love that approach where you're judging the software and then improving it, thinking of ways that we can make it better.
Yeah. And I had to learn all of this too, right? So I am the product of my product. So I started getting coached when I was 27. I was a disaster to work with. Oh my God, I was awful. Awful. My leadership scores were like -5 or something crazy like that. And this is all the result of my own coaching, being coachable, but also literally being mandated that I had to do coaching at the beginning and then choosing to invest in myself over time. So yeah, please listen to me. It took me a decade to claim the title Woman in Tech. And it was only because I was forced to by an organizer. We had to introduce ourselves. I was speaking, I was representing the company I worked for. We had to represent ourselves as like, hi. At the time, I was not using Steinback as part of my professional name yet. So I said, hi, my name is Nicole Trick. I work at this company. This is my title, and I am a woman in tech. Then we had to awkwardly stand there while people clapped for us. Okay. That's what it took for me to take this on. You don't have to take that long. You can do it much, much faster.
2 points I want to make. Compassion. I love that you brought it up. And I would add that to yourself.
Yes.
While you're using the technology and while you're being frustrated with yourself, with the technology, like not only to the software makers, but also to yourself, because I noticed you were frustrated when you first logged in, like, am I issues with my mic?
Yes.
And that frustration will come up even if you're not taking it personally. Like the mic isn't fucking working, and I want it to work because I want to do this thing. And then like that wave of compassion would allow you to just jump right back and get started, and nobody was flustered. And, I was fine. I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to go get water. It worked for me. I'm like, you solve those issues while I get a mini break and go get water. So that compassion is key. And the other thing that I heard you say, you were mandated coaching. God, I wish more people were mandated coaching. It's not a bad mandate to have, but also that if I was mandated to take physics and I hated it all the way through because I went to a private school where physics were part of what we had to do. And like, there's no way you were finishing high school if you didn't pass physics. And my last physics professor, my last grade 12, had so much compassion for my failing of the actual understanding of how to do the math that he said, write a biography on Newton. And I was like, I love you. I will write this essay. And this is how I ended up passing physics, okay? Because my professor was like, obviously, not your skill, but writing is your skill. Okay, write me something about the greatest physician of them all. And I was so grateful that he got to understand my gift was elsewhere because I did try, Yeah. But the concept that I am really taking from your experience specifically, and like not everybody who's listening to us wants to work in tech or wants to be like, that's not their goal to be a techie person, but giving yourself that permission to potentially succeed in using the technology with ease that you have to use or that you're choosing to use that could make your life easier. It's in your advantage to such degree that we can't possibly put into words until you give it a try.
So true. That's such a beautiful summary. Yeah, absolutely.
So the myth that we're not good in tech, right? And that we're then perpetually going to stay here. I can say this about physics because literally I will not have to use any equation in my future. As far as I know, I can hire somebody who can do that when I'm building my house, and I can hire, there is the experts and I will hire them. But when it comes to technology, I mean, how are you going to use Zoom if you want to call, or like even, what is it called in Apple? My FaceTime.
Yeah.
Like, it's not complicated, but your brain wants to make it complicated, wants you to believe that it's very difficult, so you abstain from using it. And in doing so, you're disconnecting, because unfortunately, technology is what is connecting us today.
Yeah.
So how do we help them break that? How do we help this generation of women? and our generation of women, because I feel that this generation of women, like the millennials, are very comfortable with technology. Like the new generations, I feel like I said, my son with so much ease use his phone, and I'm sure it's not going to be like strange to him to have another tablet later in life and like using technology. But I feel that we're stuck in the place where technology boomed in the 80s and 90s, and not all of us feel the way, a 21-year-old feels today. Like, oh, it's technology. I get it.
Yeah. Okay.
To get out of this spell we're under.
So I would just offer that that's not true. Shockingly, it's not true. So I was invited recently, because of my background, I was invited to speak to a middle school, and it was Girls Leading, I think was the name. And so we met virtually. There were like, I don't know, 70 to 80 girls in this room. And I had sent some preparatory questions because we had a very short period of time together, and I wanted them to have as much time to ask questions as we could. Mm-hmm. Three of them identified with enjoying and using technology. These are middle schoolers, right? It's not actual reality that some people feel comfortable and some people don't.
Interesting.
Right? Mm-hmm. Because coding actually started with women. The earliest recorded coders were coding before metal was available widely, right? So it's all a conceptualization that we've created in our minds that was taught to us and that made us feel safe and made us feel comfortable to continue utilizing, because every generation has people who are ahead, who are in the middle, and who are quote unquote behind, right? So I know I sound like a broken record, but it truly is transformational. Write down every time you engage with technology. Allow yourself to notice how you would make it better. Give yourself compassion. Practice compassion of others, and judge the software, judge the hardware.
Right? What does that do? Why do you insist on that point so much? Like, what is the background benefit of me thinking, how would I make it better?
So I don't actually tell people go out and think about how you can make it better, but it's a natural continuation of people saying like, oh, when I really want to connect with my kid, I get onto Discord and suddenly he sends me all of these gifts and I see his community, I see his activity, or I sit next to my daughter while she's engaging in Sims or whatever the case may be. When I want to contact my mom, especially for those of us in the sandwich generation, right? When I want to contact my mom, I use FaceTime or I use Facebook or I use WhatsApp or I use whatever. When people start when women start, men don't do this to the same extent, but when women start listing out all the ways they're engaging with technology, they just not instantly, but like by the second or third day, they'll start to your point, intuitively think of, wouldn't it be lovely if instead of, Sims being so third person, what if you could be like inside of your Sims character? And then you could really engage from their eye point. Wouldn't that be fascinating? Mm-hmm. And it builds confidence. It's just this extraordinary experience.
Like, I'm sure there was a woman behind having to put a photo on a profile. How is your face?
Yeah. So, right. And okay. So this is really interesting, right? Because, okay. So I love that you brought this up, because the reason, if you go back to like MySpace, if you really go back, if you think about the first way we could put an image onto Twitter, they were all rectangular, all of them. It's easier to code in rectangles because coding is done in tables, right? However, why are they all circles now? Because it builds relationships, it builds trust. It's this big emotional, mental thing that we have that is very innate. How do humans sit? We sit if you just let humans engage and let them just walk around of any age, humans will sit in a circle across all cultures. Mm-hmm. So the reason that it's now a circle They spent an insane amount of money to do the research to figure out how can we best make people represent themselves. Circles. People are more likely to share an actual picture of themselves when it's a circle than when it's a rectangle. Triangles, people won't even engage. If it's a stop sign, forget it.
Interesting.
Right? Stop signs drive sarcasm online. Right? So it's just let yourself become more conscious of how you're already engaging with tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then watch what happens. Judge the tech, have compassion for the people who do. You'll judge yourself less and you'll build your own self-compassion. Yeah.
And I'm going to add, because this is what's happened to me, you increase your, what you think your capacity is to learning new systems. Because like I said, with my coding class, I had such resistance. I was not even open to learning. So how can I possibly learn to code when my behavior, my attitude is, I cannot learn this thing. There's nothing my professor could have done to make me learn something that I'm not open or willing to learn.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The other thing that I would offer, if this is like speaking to you and you want to like drive this down, like listen to some conversations that are quote unquote for women in technology. You can listen to the Women in Tech podcast. You can listen to my podcast, Celebrate Brave, because you're going to realize that we're just talking about stuff you think about anyways. We're talking about money. We're talking about confidence. We're talking about working less. We're talking about earning more. We're talking about like, it's the same stuff.
Innovating. I love it. Being creative.
Yeah.
Sitting in a circle.
Yes.
Although I would remember being asked to speak at a executive meeting with all of the executives from our children's hospital. And I walk into the room and they're like, had me first of all on a stage that was higher than everybody else. And then they had brought like desks, like all school desk, and had all these people in lines. And I was like, oh, you're going to hate me. But the first thing we're going to do is remove all these things, create a circle. And I'm part of the circle. I'm not sitting above or below or in the middle. I want to sit with you guys. Yes. And this is what we're going to do. And it took us some time, and I was willing to take the time to reorganize the place. And I'm like, and for future meetings, always have me in a circle, please. Because that's intuitively is my way of connecting.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful example of how like humans built a system, humans can build a new system.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I got me shivers. I think this is good. I feel pretty good. I hope your thought after this episode, ladies, is that you can change your dynamic with technology. But I also want you to feel that it is our responsibility, really, to change that. Because what we're creating within our DNA and this feeling of technology is getting passed on to other generations. And so it is our time to stand up and say, one, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be made really easy. I can do it. I will do it. And take full advantage. Because imagine more women in technology. Like, honestly, we will have so much fun. This could become really cool if more women are behind this.
So it's really fun. And there's initial, goodness, my stutter is coming out. Initial research that says that when there's gender equity in a tech team, from business development through development, all the way into implementation and support, unintended consequences are cut by 2/3.
Imagine that.
So earn your money, work less, and make the world better. Come be a woman in tech for sure.
I love it. So everybody, if you want to get a hold of Nicole, I welcome you to listen to her podcast. Her podcast, as well as her contact information, will be in our show notes. So you guys can go ahead and do that. If you want to listen to her podcast, I think it probably is good for anybody, right, Nicole, who cares about technology and bravery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then get a hold of her. I think it's in your best interest. And I don't know exactly when you coach, what you coach, but that will be all in your handles and website and whatnot.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining my audience and saying yes. I appreciate you here sincerely. Thank you.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you inviting me. And I appreciate how just inclusive and thoughtful you are about what you're offering to your audience. It really shows up. So thank you for trusting me enough to share your gorgeous audience.
Yeah,
I
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
We all benefit. We all win, you know? It's a win-win. See you guys next Monday. Bye for now.